I'm excited about the new biomes that are going to be coming out in Albion Online. New islands that are going to be themed based on what city they're in. I think that's going to be awesome. But there's something missing about Albion Online, and what it is the luxury economy. What Albion does well is to portray the concept of consumables in a survival-based economy or in a combat-driven economy. There's a need to replace weapons as they are depleted. There's a need to replace consumables as they are used up, and the game represents that quite well. But Albion's also known for having a really toxic sort of a culture where players focus primarily on PvP, and there really isn't a lot of role-playing in any capacity outside of that PvP element. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if you just want it to be a purely PvP game. But what if you're a casual like I am, who really likes the aesthetic of a theme park game, but wants that realistic economy of a sandbox MMO? Then there's something missing. Because on one hand, there's not much to do other than to fight other players, or to try to get money so that you can get more gear and more weapons so that you can fight other players. And that leads me to the question of what is money good for outside of combat in Albion Online? First of all, it's good for building up your island or building up your guild hall or something like that. But if there was a little bit more cosmetic sort of stuff in the game, I think that would help a lot, because then you'd be able to take that gold that you've earned through investing or fighting, however you got that money, and you could buy things that just have a luxury value. There's a lot of people who go buy products, and those products are not necessarily going to be particularly useful for something. It might be fine art, it might be a piece of clothing that they just get because they like the way it looks. And Albion doesn't really have a lot of that. It doesn't have very much stuff that's really got a cosmetic value. It does have some, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have very much scope and depth when it comes to collectible furnishings. Games like Elder Scrolls Online or Final Fantasy XIV provide a good example of how you can have an economy centered around trading collectible furnishings. And that's something that I like in those sorts of games that you just don't really have particularly in Albion Online. So I was thinking, how would that really be implemented if we tried to do that? Because one of the core parts of Albion Online is having everything be player made and also making everything consumable. You don't really have anything in Albion Online that's bind on equip or anything like that, and I really like that about the game. But if you have something like a furnishing for a house and it's player crafted and it doesn't really ever get destroyed, then where is the supply and demand going to come from? Maybe one way to do that would be to create essentially changing designs, which would be dependent on a certain period of time. So, for example, if you were going to craft a certain level of table for a house, then it would have a certain style for the month of May or June, for example. And then after that month is over, then maybe the style would change, but the items which were made in the pre-existing style would remain available. And then, of course, if they were looted, some of them would eventually get destroyed. They would slowly leave the economy through various ways, but for the greater part, they would become more valuable because they would be more rare as time went on. And then you'd also have more variety because you'd have new designs for different things introduced to the game. And then as time went on, there would be a lot of different unique things that wouldn't necessarily ever be craftable again, or maybe they would be craftable during a certain month out of the year. So there would be relative rarity because it wouldn't be something that could be made again for another 11 months, for example. I don't know exactly how it could happen, but I do think that if the developers can find a way to add more luxury economy to the game so that when you get a lot of money, if you wanted to just spend that money on something not combat related, you'd be able to do that and have a good time. That would add a lot of value to the game. There'd be more incentive to just want to earn silver in the game for purposes outside of just getting better gear or getting more gear so that you can try to get the number to go up. As it is, there's a little bit of a sense that money doesn't really have value in the game unless you're using it for combat purposes, which is okay, but it leaves something to be desired. I think it would be certainly possible to not take away anything from the game, but to just add some additional cosmetic elements to islands and furnishings and give crafters something else to do in that regard, a new line of things to make and things like that. And it might be a real nice idea if it could be implemented well one day. I think it's interesting how the game does so well, but then there's other games that do have cosmetics in them, and in a way they have a uniquely realistic economy in their own way, because there are things that all sorts of players have to do. And so even if they're not as realistic as a sandbox game, titles like Elder Scrolls Online do have a certain level of realism because there are certain items that have a rarity and a lot of desire on the part of players to collect them. So a game like ESO will do a real good job of representing cultural interests and luxury economy, while Albion Online does a really good job of simulating more of a base economy. And that comes down to, what does a game mean to a person beyond just being competitive? And does it have a certain, I guess, intrinsic value? Does it speak to you from a lore perspective or from an aesthetic perspective beyond just being a vehicle for a competitive match? And the more you can have a sort of a cultural element that is an undercurrent in the game that makes people feel like it's a special world, the better. Essentially, it's good to have a sense that you're fighting for something. Then the fighting means more because you're going to have something that you get to take away when all's said and done. And I feel the same way about EVE Online. That's one of the reasons why I don't play EVE Online, because the spaceship theme just doesn't really strike me as all that interesting. There's not any base mechanic. There's not any sense of really going home to that place where you can customize things. Now, granted, you can collect ships in EVE Online, but it's not the same. It's cool to a point, but it's not the same as having the ability to see the world from a character perspective and go explore your house and have something that is more tangible. EVE Online feels really impersonal, and that's one thing that I think works against that game. It's also one thing that I think Albion Online, despite its flaws, does better than EVE Online. A fantasy environment like Albion is just a lot more relatable than a space environment like what EVE has. But if we could just somehow take the best parts of some of the theme park MMOs out there and mix it with what Albion Online is, and find a way to respect that sandbox, everything being tradable and destructible and consumable sort of a mechanic, but also find a way to put that into a more, I guess, theme park style, that would be, that would be pretty amazing, I think. Anyway, for the time being, we'll take the game as it is. Just some thoughts on economy in Albion Online. Thank you very much for watching.